I mean, I could have, like I said, I could have ended up in prison. I could have ended up, I mean, there was just so many instances where I think, like, how did my mom not just strangle me?
Welcome, everybody, to episode 5 of the Andrew Deitsch podcast. This is the second episode that I'll be posting today, May 28th. That is my birthday, and I already talked about how it was my birthday on episode 4, so I'm not going to bore you with all of that information again. If you want to hear about my thoughts on my birthday, you can go listen to episode 4. But my guest today is Trey Reed. Trey's birthday was actually yesterday, and Trey is a world traveler, multi-linguist, musician, and a great friend. And growing up, Trey was like an older brother to me. He actually babysat me when my brother and I were kids. I've always had amazing conversations with him, and this conversation was definitely no different. Trey actually lived in Korea for 2 years, but we didn't even have time to get into that because we started talking about politics, mental illness, gun control, being libertarian. And so that took up about the first half of the podcast, which is actually extremely fascinating. And then we got into his personal story, which is also very powerful. And so we didn't even get to discuss his 2 crazy years in Korea that much. But needless to say, he will be coming back on the podcast to talk about his travels. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with my buddy Trey Reed. All right, we're live, Trey Reed.
What up?
So we were just talking like 2 seconds ago about, how in today's world we don't really get to have very many good, genuine conversations with people or stuff like that, and everyone's distracted. Everyone's watching like 2 seconds of a video here, and they have an opinion, or they'll read a headline, and they already have an opinion about whatever it is, and it's kind of just like a cancer to our society, I think.
Well, what's sad is that people, I mean, for whatever reason, they just want to have people that agree with them. And so there's a point where they like just can't agree to disagree. I have that kind of relationship with a cousin of mine where she's about as Democrat as it can get, and I'm a libertarian, but we agree to disagree, and it doesn't matter because I love her very much based upon the fact that she's my family. I don't care that she would vote for Hillary Clinton or whatever. But people can't, I mean, even at work, I hate Donald Trump. He's a freaking moron. And
you work at a gun range right now?
Yeah. So everybody I work with is super staunch. I wouldn't, maybe you could say conservative, but it's like they're 100% on board with Trump. And then yesterday you find out that he just gave classified intelligence, just was like talking to people, to Russian ambassadors. And then I can picture in my mind this situation where, the dude just wants to gloat about himself. Let me tell you, we know so much about ISIS. We've got intelligence all over the world, okay? And the Russian guys are probably like, oh, tell us, what kind of intelligence? And he's like, let me tell you, I'll give you something. And then he tells
That's a good impression.
And then he tells him whatever. And it's like, dude, like I wish that idiot would get off of Twitter. It's like, get off of Twitter, shut your mouth, and be a president. I didn't vote for that moron. I voted for Gary Johnson, even though he wasn't. And I think the reason I got pulled to voting him was because of that whole bit where where he's on stage. You know that you see
Gary
him
Johnson?
you see him on stage. He's with like some other lady, and there's a moderator, and the lady's like, oh, smoking marijuana, you know, it increases the chance of heart attack like within an hour, and then he
keels over.
In the middle of her talking, he goes, ah! and falls over on the stage. And I was like, what an idiot, but that's freaking hilarious.
I really liked Gary Johnson. There were some fatal flaws, unfortunately, with Gary Johnson, I think. Like, for example, him just being ridiculous like that. And, like, do you see how he got up in that one reporter's face about, like, you know, they confronted him about something, and he's like, well, how was I? Blah, blah, blah. Like, I think they brought up the Aleppo thing, and he was like, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, well, I never called it Aleppo. You know what he said? He called it Aleppo, and so he didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah, his excuse was they said he was thinking they were saying like Aleppo, like Aleppo was a thing.
Yeah,
Aleppo. What is Aleppo? Yeah, but yeah. So you said you were a libertarian, and I feel like I'm kind of a libertarian too, but I don't know, like all growing up, you know, living in a, you know, Christian family and growing up in the South and growing up in suburban Atlanta, I think there's a lot of pressure to be like conservative. How did that affect you, and like how did that kind of at one point did you consider yourself a conservative? Or
I don't think I ever really cared about politics very much. I'll say this: I'm libertarian on a lot of things, but then in some ways I would not match, you know, like I don't think prostitution should be a totally legal enterprise. I also don't think abortion should be illegal. However, I would say
you don't think it should be legal, or you don't think
I don't think it should be. I don't think it should be a legal option for just
a legal option. I see.
Yeah, I don't think it should be a legal option just for. You know, well, I don't like, you know, my baby's going to have Down syndrome, so let's just abort him.
Yeah, I'm against that as well.
But I definitely, where I agree with the libertarians is you know, states' rights, letting each state decide. If California wants to legalize marijuana and cocaine and prostitution and have, you know, very easy access to abortion, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Kentucky, that doesn't mean that they have to do the same thing.
So kind of using the states as like an incubator for ideas, or?
Well, I mean, it's just, that goes, I think the original intent of the constitutional document was that people would, that states would, the power of the federal government initially was very limited. It's after the Civil War that you see the power of the federal government begin to increase, and slowly take different, you know,
powers,
take different rights away from states. I mean, we have all kinds of bureaucracies in the federal government that are not outlined as powers in the Constitution, like the Department of Education. Mm-hmm. That's not something that's outlined in the... Education should be taken care of by states. And then it's better that way because, hey, let the states compete.
Mm-hmm.
Let the states compete for who's got the best education system.
Yeah.
And the thing is, what people need in New York City, Manhattan, is not what people need in, you know, Bogart, Georgia.
Yep, 100% agreed.
You know, so you've got these kids, they're learning, like, and they want to do the Common Core stuff and make everyone learn the same thing.
Yeah. Well,
kids in the middle of Georgia, like, let's be honest, they're going to be farmers. They need to be learning things like, you know, well, they don't need to, but what would be more beneficial to them rather than learning British or world literature, right, is to learn skills, basic engineering skills, right, basic agricultural skills, forestry, conservation, those kind of things. But we have a federal government who says, no, we know better than you, and so you need to be teaching everyone this. Well, the needs are not the same. And really, when you look at like economic production, you see that like capitalism really thrives off of like it thrives off of like having a particular thing that you do very well. So, you know, down here, it used to be tobacco. Now it's peanuts. It used to be cotton. Now it's peanuts and some other stuff. Arkansas, it's rice. But
in Ohio, like corn.
There's a specialty that they have that, you know, they can't do that in Massachusetts, right? We can't grow cranberries down here. They can do that in Wisconsin just fine. That's where all the cranberries come from, most of them that we get here in the U.S. So you have a specialty, and really it's not like you have to force people to do it, but most people are going to end up being in an industry that's similar to that if they're in that area, right? And when you have an area specializing in something, that's where they can really make money, right? If we tried to grow cranberries here, we just don't have the climate for it. Yeah. So we grow other things. We have places where we specialize. You know, you go out to California, they've got different things that they specialize in. Yeah. You go to Texas,
avocados, almonds. Yeah, that makes sense. So if anyone listening, you know, I kind of have a pretty like good, I guess, description of what a libertarian would be. But like for someone who, you know, maybe they really don't even know what a libertarian is. Maybe they think it's this kind of wacky alternative party, Tea Party kind of people, or, you know, they just have no idea what it is. How would, like, you said, you know, that you're a libertarian. How would you just describe libertarians? Or what is a libertarian?
A libertarian, I would say, I've never actually even looked up the dictionary definition of it, but I would say a libertarian is somebody who wants the government to be they want the government to be as small as possible, and what they want to do in place of a smaller government is they want to replace it with more individual liberty. And with that individual liberty comes, you know, your right to choose, hey, I'm going to smoke pot, or, you know, I'm going to become a prostitute, or I'm going to, right, like I'm going to build a house here on the land that I own, and not be told by the EPA, well, you can't do that because there's a bird that lives in those trees, which is an endangered species. You know, so a libertarian in a nutshell wants to maximize personal liberty, individual liberty, to make decisions, to do things at their own, you know, either betterment or, you know, or worse. So, and that's my definition of it. Yeah. Now, I'm not 100% over there. Yeah. Because at the same time, you know, when you go way right of libertarianism, you get anarchy. Yeah. You know, I do whatever I want. I'm my own government type deal. And then left, you go way right, and you have communism. You know, you have communism. Yeah. Fascist states.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one way that I've heard it really just well described is there's like a square, and you have one, you know, like an XY kind of grid. One way you've got conservatism all the way to the right, and you've got all the way liberal all the way to the top. And so I've heard libertarians being described as fiscally conservative, so small government, you know, all that kind of stuff, but socially liberal in the way that, like you said, you know, if you want to be gay, cool. If you want to smoke weed, cool. You know, a lot of times conservatives have a bad rap of, you know, being extremely puritanical and biblical, that they want to just lock down all the fun kind of thing. I think that's what people kind of look at it as a lot of times.
Yeah, and as far as the socially, you know, liberal aspect, I think that's a place where I want people to be able to make their own decisions, but I think I also think that there should be there has to be a moral foundation for like anything that you call a good, right? And so I think you have to choose a moral foundation upon which to, you know, say, hey, okay, which liberties are good? You know, what ought I do? So for me, while I may not personally agree with drug use, I may not personally agree with.
Prostitution,
abortion. Even gun rights to a certain extent. It's like I can see an argument for not, even though I love guns and I love my Second Amendment, I can see a valid argument for not letting people just walk into a store and buy an automatic weapon.
Totally. And I think having that nuanced perspective is, crucial for any well-adjusted human being. If you can't see the argument for the other side, that's kind of a problem, I think, sometimes. A lot of times I try to see the argument and understand it. I might not agree with it, but I can see, like you said, I could see why someone would want to have stricter gun standards. Then you got to look at what the repercussions of those actions might be. And, it just doesn't add up. You could point to places like Australia where they pretty much just banned guns. You can say, well, it worked out well for them there, but you also have to consider you're dealing with the area size of the United States, land mass of the United States, with the population of a city like Los Angeles. There's just not that many people.
Well, not only that, but the thing is with a country like Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, they don't have their guns anymore. They also have laws against what's called hate speech.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like that when people talk about getting rid of guns, it's like, if there was legitimately a way to make it so that no person in the United States had a gun and that we could trust our government to remain benevolent, right?
It's just not feasible.
But it's not possible. The whole reason guns exist is so that we can be an armed people. I mean, look at, there was an interview with Jesse Ventura, and I mean, if you're talking about idiots, he's an idiot.
I'm not super familiar with him. Who is he again?
He was the governor of Minnesota. He was a former Navy SEAL, a former professional, like WWE style wrestler. I don't know which organization it was with.
And he was the governor?
He was a governor of Minnesota for, I think it was Minnesota. I'm pretty sure it was for one term. And but now he's a nut. Now he does all this conspiracy theory stuff. 9/11 was an inside job, and the Illuminati, big group of Jews out there. It's just stupid. But he said one thing. He was being interviewed by Piers Morgan, and Piers Morgan went on this huge rant about guns for the longest time. After Sandy Hook, he was he was just like, every episode was about, this is why we need to get rid of guns. And and Jesse Ventura was being interviewed by him, and Jesse Ventura said one thing which, being part Filipino, resonated with me. He was talking about a dictator in the Philippines who, I believe in the 70s or 80s, he came to power, and one of the first things he did was to tell every Filipino they had just a couple weeks to turn in their firearms, or they were going to come and get them. So the first thing he did was he took away their firearms. And after that, you have this history of extrajudicial killings, just killing people in the streets, killing his detractors, throwing people in jail who were his political rivals or opponents. And that's a huge blemish on Filipino history. But it's things like that where, if we don't have a way to defend ourselves, what chance do we stand against a government that wields all this power and has the capability to destroy us? And people will say, oh, you think an AR-15 is going to stand up against a cruise missile? No, of course I don't. But what would you prefer? To be fighting a government with sticks and rocks and machetes made from tire leaf springs? Or would you prefer to actually have a little bit of firepower? Which roll of the dice would you prefer? And I think any rational thinking being, if you consider the scenario of a malevolent government that's out to get people, then yeah, you would choose to have a firearm. Who wouldn't? To
Yeah.
defend yourself. I mean, and it's hard for, I think, our generation to consider that because we are so far removed from any kind of conventional conflict, right? Where there's clearly like a defined evil. I mean, we have the
The
war.
closest thing we have is like ISIS, and that's thankfully for us been pretty far removed as far as we've had a few things here and there, but we've been very fortunate to not have that many attacks here on American soil.
Absolutely. And I think people just, we're, like I said, we're so far removed from any kind of major conflict that would, you think about generations before us, right? Our grandparents, it was either World War II, the Korean War, or Vietnam. And then after that, we lived in relative peace for quite a while. And even today, it may be the war in Iraq and the war that we're waging in the Middle East. We're still removed from it. I mean, we see things on the news, but at the same time, it doesn't touch home like some of those other wars did. And at the same time, it's an unconventional war that we're fighting. So there's not like a clear. We know who the enemy is, but we don't actually. They're not waving a flag and saying, these are our borders. We and our people wage war against you. It's like this. It's literally a guerrilla tactics. Hey, strap a bomb to this car and put a family in there so that they don't suspect anything, and then blow the car up with the family and take a few soldiers with you. So, it's a different war, and I think just being removed from it, people just don't understand.
They don't have any kind of perspective. I've heard a lot of times that after 9/11, like in New York, just the whole general vibe of everybody was totally different. Everyone was much more friendly to each other. Everyone was much more, because the fragility of life was put into such perspective that they, were nicer to each other. They didn't take life for granted. And I think that, like you said, there's not a clearly defined enemy. There's not that much threat here right now. I mean, I feel like the government or police officers or whatever may beg to differ and say there is large threats here, which I'm sure there are, but they're doing their best to minimize that. But going kind of back to what you were saying about gun owners and stuff, I think like quote unquote gun people get kind of a bad rap because they're always thinking about this violence. We were talking about someone on Facebook that said like violence is always the answer, that kind of thing. And I think that, I would say kind of just normies, just regular people going about their business. They're not on a day-to-day basis even thinking about guns, thinking about violence. They may get into some sort of verbal dispute, but, they're so far removed from any kind of physical conflict that I think that whenever they think of guns, they immediately think that it's just this unnecessary evil that, we have in our society. But like you were saying, would you rather have an AR-15 against would you rather have an AR-15 or sticks and stones? I'd prefer to have at least the access. And that's another thing. I think that me personally, I actually don't own a firearm right now, but if there was some sort of conflict, I definitely know the right people that would help me out in those times. Like I know where I could, go to one of my friends and get a gun if I needed to or whatever. And I in Boy Scouts and stuff, I did shoot some guns, and I've shot a decent amount of guns. I'm not definitely super skilled in firearms, but
Me neither.
And you work at a gun range, and that it's like there's definitely a spectrum of how deep down the gun rabbit hole you can go. But I just think that like at the end of the day, you have to put it all in perspective of if you do take away these guns, kind of like you were saying in the Philippines, like they took away the guns, and what good did it do? It didn't do any good. Yeah,
it didn't do any good. And I think that people who, So I try to be as intellectually honest about this as possible. A gun is, people say it's a tool. Well, yes, it is a tool, but it is a tool specifically designed for the task of killing. And I'm honest about that because that's just the truth. Firearms were developed.
It's not designed to cut down a tree.
Right.
You could, but it's not the best tool for the job.
Right. And so firearms are designed to kill. And so when people detract from them, I think that's where they're coming from is this is a tool designed to kill. But like I said earlier, the reason we have them is a very valid one. It's so that we do not become like Nazi Germany, so that we do not become like the Philippines or so many other countries where, I mean, imagine if the people in Libya, right, had guns when they're going up against Gaddafi's military. I mean, they're throwing rocks and sticks and, at best, Molotov cocktails at these people. And they're just getting ripped apart by these, huge machine guns, just in waves, just getting decimated. And, which one, it's, again, which roll of the dice do you prefer? I think that firearms has a place. And I think that lots of people are just turned off by a firearm, but most of the time it's because they've never handled it before.
They're scared.
I hear people talk about, they claim to know about firearms, but then they'll call a certain gun an assault rifle. And they think, oh, that's what AR stands for in AR-15. But that's not what it stands for. AR-15 stands for Armalite, which is, Armalite was the company that began to make the AR-15. And you just see a lot, they'll call a magazine a clip and stupid stuff like that. I get people all the time who'll come into the store and they'll ask for a 40 with a beam. They want a 40 caliber pistol with a laser on it. And people call a magazine an extendo.
Extendo?
An extendo. They want the extended clip. Like, nah, man.
Give me that extendo clip, bruh.
And let me get that 40 with a beam, cuz. I'm like, all right. Like, well, let me show you what I have.
Let me get that 40 with a beam, cuz.
But I think a lot of people, it's like, it's just general ignorance. Like, they've never fired a gun before. They've never shot a gun before. They've never been close enough to see where somebody's had to use a gun to defend themselves.
Yeah. And
the arguments that get used by, pro-Second Amendment people, I think they're still valid, right? So the argument is if you, like, using a gun for self-defense, and they'll say, why do you need an AR-15 with a huge, with a drum magazine of 100. Well, who the hell knows, right?
Yeah.
Because these days, if they come at you, they don't come at you just one guy, right? They come at you in two or three.
Mm-hmm.
So
meaning
a criminal, right? Mm-hmm. Any criminal, when they come at you with two or three people.
Mm-hmm.
They come at you in groups. In the Philippines, they've had to ban, in certain areas, people riding on motorcycles. I think in the city of Manila, people riding on motorcycles, 2 men. 2 men riding on one motorcycle. And the reason is they were using that for killings.
One guy shooting, one guy driving.
One guy they ride up to like just whoever, and I mean you can a hit in the Philippines cost you like $50. I mean you just have to, you tell them where they'll be, they ride up, one guy gets off, bam, get right back on the bike and drive away.
So you can hire a hitman for $50.
Essentially,
you want someone dead, $50 will get you.
Sure.
Get him dead. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, But there's a lot of arguments that are used by Second Amendment people, which get really played out a lot. But I think they're still valid. You have the defense of liberty. We have it to protect ourselves against the government
and your family.
You have it to protect your own family, and then we have it just because at the end of the day, and people use this a lot. You can use whatever you want as a weapon of destruction. Right, and there's a social contract that we have with each other, which says, "Hey, you don't try to kill me. I don't try to kill you." That's a social contract that we have just being in this room together.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if I thought you were going to kill me, I wouldn't come, or I'd try to kill you first.
Yeah. There's a knife right behind you.
Yeah, and so we have the social contract, which says, we're not going to kill each other. We're going to try to get along as best as possible. But someone can always come and disrupt that.
Yeah.
And so we have the individual liberty to do what we want, and you never know the intention of a heart. Somebody can lie to your face. Well, I don't want to kill anybody, and then they'll go kill somebody. And so you can use whatever you want as a weapon of destruction. In Korea, when I lived in Korea, it was funny because they banned knives, right, like pocket knives,
but not for like cooking.
But yeah, you could have a kitchen knife. Well,
but not a folding. Well, how do they do?
Right, you couldn't have a folder. You couldn't have a pocket knife that was more than like 1.5 inches, 2 inches.
Wow.
And even then, it depends on the police, the city you live in, and if you get caught with it, like if I was to get caught with it as a foreigner, I would have been
done.
I would have been deported. But the thing was, these kids, the little kids that were going to school, man, they had these box cutters. They had box cutters that they would use to sharpen their pencils. And it's like, what's the difference? The 9/11 hijackers used box cutters. They took over a plane, multiple planes, and they killed, more than 3,000 people in an afternoon. Stuff like that. There was one story of and what's funny, talking about knives, I had moved from one area to another when I was in Korea, and the day that I moved in, there was this bar that was kind of, I was down an alley, and there was a bar on the street side, and there was like this police tape around it, and a lot of people like looking in and stuff. And as I'm bringing my stuff into the new house where I'm going to live with my roommates, the grandma who lived on the level below comes out, and she starts to tell us about how somebody had been knifed to death by a steak knife in that bar. Actually, it was a karaoke bar, so it was a place where they had these little rooms and you do karaoke and they serve different beverages, and somebody had been knifed to death there.
Wow!
It's like
with a steak knife.
Yeah, with a steak knife, and you never know. I mean, you can use a weapon in any way, shape, or form. Look at France. The guy didn't even need a gun. He just took a truck through a crowded street and he killed more people than he would have if he had a gun. The same thing happened in China. One guy just got into his mind that he wanted to kill people, and so he drove his van through a crowded market and he killed more than 30 people. I think how long that takes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can do more damage with a car than you can with a firearm.
Yeah. I mean, essentially you're driving a giant metal, blunt object.
Absolutely. And so, the argument is used a lot, and I think that people who don't like guns, who want more gun control, they don't like hearing that argument because they hear it so much, but they can't invalidate it. I mean, the best argument they have is, well, at least in this way we're getting rid of one means by which to stop people from killing each other. But at the end of the day, man, if you want to kill somebody, Cain and Abel, He didn't have a gun,
Mm-hmm.
but he killed his brother anyways. I don't know what he used, a club or a rock or something.
I think he hit him over the head or something like that.
And he killed him. I mean, you look at that. You've never needed a gun.
Yeah.
A gun can make it more convenient in some ways.
It
I
suppose.
definitely
Can. Like you said, it's designed for murder.
But at the same time, if you want to kill, I mean, you will find a way to do it. So.
Yeah, and I think that I've heard this phrase before, and this is not my original thing, but it says that in America we have a mental health problem disguised as a gun problem. And I think it's kind of back to what you were saying, you know, if someone wants to kill, they'll find the means to kill. And I think that if someone has it in their brain that they're going to kill, taking away their guns is not they're going to find a way. And like you said, you know, taking away the guns is at least taking away their best option. But, you know, we've seen it with cars. What are we going to do? Ban cars, ban vans, ban large cars. What are we going to do?
It was funny because when I was reading about the laws in Korea regarding knives, because I collect knives. I love to have a knife because...
Yeah, we were in Boy Scouts. We had knives.
Absolutely. I love to have a knife on me because I actually feel more comfortable with a knife just because, not for any reason of protection or whatever, but because I have, you know, oh, I need to cut this box open. Oh, I need to smash this window, whatever, you know.
Whatever, a multi-tool.
Right, because you have a knife it has great utility in day-to-day life. And so I wanted a knife, and when I was in Korea, I was researching, trying to figure it out, and I was like, well, the laws aren't very good. And what was funny was I was looking at a forum where people were talking about in Japan how they had said, well, now the legal limit on a knife blade is 2 inches. And then what happened was somebody got stabbed with a knife blade and killed with a knife blade that was 2 inches. And the response was, okay, now the limit is 1 inch. And somebody on that forum made a joke which made me laugh. And they said, yeah, their solution is to just say the limit is 1 inch. And at some point they're going to just ban martial arts and start like fining people for clenching their fists. It's like, yeah, right?
It's true though. Like you can't stop someone from killing somebody. You can't, because you've always got your arms, you've always got your legs, you've always got your hands. And if someone wants to train to be able to kill somebody,
the only way to prevent another human being from killing another person is to physically isolate them from that person, for contact with that person, to forcibly restrain them, right?
Yeah, so violence. I mean,
yeah. In a way, it is. I mean, if somebody, and you know, when people talk about the mental health problem, I mean, for me, sure, some of it's mental health. I mean, what? I shouldn't have even said his name. You should beep out his name. Yeah. The guy who did the Sandy Hook killing.
Yeah. I had almost kind of blocked out who it was. I wasn't sure which one you were talking about. I wasn't sure if it was the movie theater guy or the Sandy Hook guy. I couldn't remember the names.
Yeah, you should bleep out his name, because he should have no infamy.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't want to do that. So the Sandy Hook guy.
So this guy, you know, he had Asperger's, and then the you know, the evil person that shot up the Charleston, that church in Charleston, South Carolina, he didn't have anything wrong with him.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think the biggest...
You could say that he did, just in the fact that he wanted to murder a whole bunch of people. You know, there's obviously some kind of weird disconnect.
Well, my thing is, I say rather than a mental health issue, for me, it's a sin issue. You know, there's always going to be... I think that... So the assumption is there's two different presuppositions looking at that, right? You have one that says the natural human response is a benevolent one, that you wouldn't want to kill somebody. But I think that the natural response is more malevolent, right? I think that the first instinct is to kill someone, right? We even think those thoughts in our head. We may not act on them, but lots of times, somebody makes us angry, does something to us, wrongs us in a certain way, and our first thought is not like, I'd like to give you a really nice watch,
I want to give that guy a hug.
Yeah, our first thought is like, I'd like to run you over with a car, something along those lines, or like, I'd like to knock your teeth out.
Yeah, I think it happens a lot with driving.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
Because you are in a bubble of anonymity. You are anonymous within that bubble, and because while we're in that bubble, we feel entitled to this stretch of road that we are driving on. And so when somebody cuts it off, part of it is like, dude, you could have, if I wasn't so alert, you could have seriously killed me.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's part of it. So the response is a natural response. But lots of times, right, it's just somebody who, like, they didn't use their blinker. And it's like, it's like if I had a gun, I could shoot your tires out and leave you stranded. I would. And so we see that, and it kind of progresses. The first few times it happens will be, it's somebody like seriously like, dude, this person almost just killed me. They ran a red light, they ran a stop sign. But then other times it's like he didn't use a blinker. He needs to be killed in the village square. And so but I think because we feel entitled to the road that we're driving on, and then we are anonymous in that bubble. I remember one time where this guy, and this was one instance where I've had to actually draw my gun.
Wow.
Was this dude was trying to turn into a gas station, right? But he didn't have his blinker on. He's just sitting there, and I thought that he's trying to continue going. Well, I came to get into the turn lane, so I'm to his left, but he's going in the opposite direction, right? So he's to my left, I'm to his left, and I stopped there, and I didn't realize that I'm cutting off his ability to get into the gas station, but he didn't have his blinker on, so how could I know?
You didn't know that yeah.
And he's just cussing at me.
You could hear him, or?
Oh yeah, his windows rolled down, he's just cursing at me. And I looked at him and I was like, F you, dude. Like, you didn't have your blinker on. And the traffic started to move a little bit, and the guy puts his car in park and gets out and starts approaching my car. And he's cussing at me, and he's looking like he's about to attack me. And I was like, well. And so
Now's the time.
So I just pulled out my piece and I brandished it and I flashed it at the window. And I was like, you really want to do this? And his eyes got wide and he got back into his car. The light turned green, and I was like, time to get out of here.
Yeah.
So I drove off. But even then, I don't think I handled that well. I probably shouldn't have brandished my gun. But that guy was,
he was out of line.
The fact that he cussed me out, and then I was like, well, normally in a circumstance where I would have tried to be more diplomatic, I was like, F you, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm thinking I'm about to drive off, never see this person again in my life.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, there's definitely an argument for that, because you never know who's going to be the crazier person. If someone thinks they can out crazy you, we see videos on YouTube all the time of people, in traffic, they yell at someone, the other guy gets out and jumps on their hood and starts pounding on their car, and you think that person's not going to out crazy you because you're the craziest one. You're jumping on their hood. Next thing you know, they're going to drive off with you on the hood. That's even crazier.
Right.
You don't know where this is going to escalate.
It's a game of chicken.
It really is a game of chicken. You're right.
Who can be the craziest?
Mm-hmm.
And
definitely.
I don't know, man. But anyways, back to what I was saying. I think that the response that we have initially to things like that is one that is violent. which is why I think that it's an issue of sin, or if you want to put it in another terms, it's just an issue of evil.
Yeah.
Or just mental illness may play a role in certain parts, right? But was Hitler mentally ill? You know, was Stalin mentally ill? And I think that there's a movement of people that what they want to do is they want to take what has traditionally been called evil and ascribe to it either a genetic, a biological, chemical, or mental cause, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, this person did it because he wasn't raised right. You know, they even put it down to social factors. This person did it because he wasn't raised right. Oh, this person did it because he's got a chemical imbalance in his brain. Well, call evil evil, you know? It's... Then who's responsible, you know? Oh, no one's responsible. And just for me, and being in the philosophy department where I went to school, when I studied, I had to deal with those issues a lot, where it's like, people hesitate to call it evil, and it's like, no, there's evil. But the thing is, if you don't have a moral foundation, right? If you don't have a foundation upon which to call something evil, you have to call it something. So you have to have a justification for it being there. Why is it there? Why does that exist? Right? And so if you don't have a foundation to say, this is just evil, this is wrong, this is sin, you have to call it something. You have to explain why it's there. And so people say, well, it's mental disease, or people say, well, it's it's chemical imbalance in the brain. This person needs medicine. No, there are some people out there that are just evil, and the solution is they need to be killed. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, think about, if we applied what certain academics want to ascribe evil to, right? If we applied that across the board equally, well, then this person that shot up that church in Charleston, he doesn't need to, he's just sick. And so you need to treat the sickness. Rather than saying, no, he's an evil human being who did an evil thing and needs to pay for the evil, the wicked that he's done. They say, oh, well, he's sick and we need to treat the sickness. No, he's not sick. He just had an evil thought in his mind and he acted upon it.
So do you think, like you were saying, evil people need to be killed? Is that your personal belief, or is that what you're just saying people say?
I think everyone is evil to a certain extent, right? But if you act upon that evil, right? If I think, if I act upon that evil, right? If someone acts upon that evil, then yeah, they need to be, there needs to be some kind of punishment, right? Mm-hmm. I believe in punishment of retribution.
Yeah, I believe so too, but just to play devil's advocate a little bit here, like,
please,
would you say, that person, they had we all have moments of weakness. Some people have sin in different ways, and some people choose to be evil in different ways, whereas, I could be evil in a way that is not so public and doesn't, I don't know, I'm not killing people, but maybe I'm doing something immoral in another way, I don't know. Can't think of a great example right now, but to kind of play devil's advocate, do people like that deserve some sort of grace? In a lot of ways, sometimes someone who used to be a crazy criminal and murderer and whatever, they can turn their life around and become a functioning member of society and maybe even help some people or bring some people out of bad situations or whatever,
Sure.
Based on their story.
Sure. As to your moment of weakness point, are you familiar with the Book of Virtues?
Yeah.
I think there used to be a little...
my parents read them to me when I was younger.
Do you remember what those virtues were?
To be honest, I couldn't name them off, but I kind of know the gist of it. It's kind of kind of similar to, the fruits of the Spirit in the Bible or something like that, or right? Isn't it kind of similar to that? Or maybe even the Boy Scouts, a scout is reverent, a scout is loyal, trustworthy, kind, cheerful, thrifty, brave, those kind of things. Is that somewhat similar to what
right
the Book of Virtues
the
are?
Book of Virtues.
I know there's one Book of Virtues that's really large that I know my parents had. And then there was like a junior Book of Virtues that I think they gave me when I was younger. It was like a kid version of it.
So even just talking about the, even just talking about like Book of Virtues and whatever fruits of the Spirit, one of the things that was, one of the things that I never remember hearing about, I remember there being pride. I don't remember there ever being self-control. And I think self-control is the Bible talks of fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
Against these things there is no law.
Correct. And so I think that to a certain point, it's like there is a demand for self-control, right? And sure, we all have moments of weaknesses where we snap, but to snap and take with you one or many other lives, right? And I mean, you look at it, right?
It's unforgivable.
There's distinctions between crimes of passion. Typically, crimes of passion are never met with the death penalty. But something like that, right? He's going to get the death penalty. I'm pretty sure that they've sentenced him to that in some way. I think he's appealing it or something. I mean, what that despicable excuse for a human being did was premeditated, wanted to start a race war, walked into a church and killed people based on the color of their skin because he's just a wicked human being. So he
dehumanized them so much in his own brain that he probably wouldn't kill his own mother or something, but he said he probably wanted to start a race war.
That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to start a race war.
It was a black church, right? Mm-hmm. So he wanted to just go kill a bunch of black people and start a race war.
And he went to that Bible study, and they welcomed him with open arms. They showed him nothing but love and compassion. And they said, hey, we're an all-black church. Who cares if you're white? Come in, join us.
That's amazing.
And what was his response? To pull a gun out of his bag and start shooting them, executing them one by one. He's an animal. And you know what? I mean, at a certain point, it's like something like that demands justice. So what is the justice for that? And I think to a certain point, if you've premeditated it and you kill somebody, you get killed back.
Yeah.
And it just goes. There's two major theories of justice that are competing here. There's justice of retribution, and there's justice of rehabilitation. So you have the one that says, you know what? You stole, so you're going to make restitution, right? Mm-hmm. And make right what you made wrong. And then the rehabilitation side says, you stole, so you're going to be in here until you're not a thief anymore.
Kind of silly, huh?
And that's kind of a caricature of it, but to a certain extent...
But it is pretty much what it is.
Yeah, to a certain extent, you're going to be in here until we can make sure that you're not a thief anymore. Well, one reason that's stupid is who's in charge of that, right? One doctor who's... or a panel of doctors who's saying, yeah, I think he's not a thief anymore. We tested him and his pupils don't dilate when he sees shiny objects or whatever. You know,
Seems very silly.
However they would
Seems very silly.
However they would gauge it, or to stand before a jury of peers, normal people, rather than self-proclaimed experts, and have everyday people look at what you did and say, "What do you deserve for this crime that you've committed?"
It's a little bit poetic, though, that a jury of normal people would be able to decide because, you know, hypothetically, he probably committed whatever crimes against, you know, a normal person. And so if you're just going to go out and commit crimes against normal people, I guess normal people will kind of get to decide what your fate is. You know, there's definitely somewhat of a poetic side to that, but then also, who are these normal people that are on the jury that should have any kind of decision whether this guy goes or stays, lives or dies, whatever. But then again, you have to say, who is this doctor? Who are these panel of doctors? Who are these guys? Just because they went to school for this many years, just because they somehow...
Exactly.
You know, society says that they have this knowledge or they have some sort of superior moral standard that they get to decide. No, that's kind of bullshit.
People have been saying, they're experts. Well, you know what? It was also experts that told us that we needed to clean up the gene pool and kill handicapped people, poor people, dumb people, and blacks. You know, those were experts. Those were scientists who were highly regarded in their field. Experts are freaking idiots.
Yeah, and they're just people.
Yeah. I mean,
they're not superhuman.
Yeah, exactly. And so...
They have the same struggles as everyone else.
So I go back to... I firmly believe in in retributive justice.
You kill someone, you get killed.
In a sense,
in the most simplest
there's
way
a price that you have to pay. Now, I think one of the ways in which it's kind of a good and kind of a bad, when you commit a crime, right? So if I kill you, it is not seen as a crime against you. Your family, they're seen as victims, you're seen as a victim, but it's not a crime against you, right? It's a crime against the state. Which is why when people are tried, right, who is prosecuting? Who is prosecuting the case? Who do they work for? The prosecutor.
The state.
They
right?
work for the state. Yeah, they work for the government. And so, right, if a drunk driver hits you, if you want to be made whole again for the damages that were caused to you, for the time you lost at work, for, you know, maybe having to have a leg, you know, for being crippled for the rest of your life, because that crime is prosecuted as a crime against the state, you have to go through civil. And so you have two areas, right? You go after someone in civil court, and then you go after somebody in criminal court. So that's one way where I think it might be able to be tweaked a little bit, because, the state will basically say, we're going to seek retribution on your behalf. But, sometimes, and I'm not a law expert by any means, and somebody, is probably going to be like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, someone listening to this is screaming.
Yeah. Well,
screaming at their...
I'll tell you what, you're right. I don't know what I'm talking about. In fact, that was my worry every day when I walked into the philosophy classroom. I was like, today's the day that everyone's going to find out that
I'm a fraud.
That I have no idea what I'm saying.
I think everyone kind of has that, though. And I think if you don't have that, a little bit of fear that, oh, no, they're going to find me out as a fraud, you're not being honest with yourself a lot of times, and like you said, kind of experts are a lot of times just bullshit artists that are...
if you think you know everything.
Yeah, and there's definitely people that... kind of like the Malcolm Gladwell Outliers kind of famous 10,000 hours deal where, if you have put in 10,000 hours into your craft, no doubted that you're one of the you're in the top 0.1% of the population in whatever you're doing. Just statistically, no one's going to be putting in that amount of time and effort into whatever. So maybe, depending on what you call an expert, sure, you're an expert. But if you're not admitting that there's things you don't know, or that you're admitting that you are the end all be all, the buck stops here kind of deal, it's kind of problematic or very discouraging almost.
There's always room to grow.
Yeah. And if you fail to see that, then that's very disappointing.
But even when you think of stuff like mental health, right? Going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's like we still know so little about how the brain, like, what is consciousness?
Yeah.
Right? Oof. Where is it? Is it in the mind? Is it just solely chemical processes?
And is it specific to your brain? If you got a brain transplant, would you have the consciousness of that person, or would you keep your own?
Exactly. And so we don't know the answer to these questions. And I mean, social, like, behavior, is that is it a product of social environment? Is it a product of chemical balances or imbalances in your brain? Is it both? And then how does one affect the other? And how strong does one affect behavior over the other? It's just like, I've met people with Asperger's, right? And there's varying levels of Asperger's.
Yeah, there's a spectrum for sure.
But I've met people with Asperger's who were not brought up right, and as soon as you step into a room with them, you're like, there's something off about this guy, right?
You can't put your finger on it, but you just know.
Where they can't, and I've got, there's someone very close to me who is like that, where, you just step into a room and it's like, oh my gosh, like, dude, like, I can't be in a room with you for more than 5 minutes because you can't take social cues.
Yeah.
And I've always got to be there, excusing, if I'm out with him in public, I've got to excuse him to other people because I'm like, that was really weird and strange that you just did that to another person.
not to throw that person under the bus. Can you name like an example? Just, if you don't want to, don't. But
I was with him and we were at like Popeyes, man, and he just walked up to the cashier and was like, hey, I think you're pretty hot. Just, I don't know if you'd go out with me, if I could like get your number. Maybe we could party sometime. And I was like, dude, you saw that on TV and you think it works, and it doesn't.
No.
But then
what did you do? You had to apologize to the.
I said, step away from the counter, just like that. And then I looked at the girl and I said, I'm like, sorry. I was like, don't pay any mind to him. You won't have to talk to him again. You'll deal with me. And so I paid for everything, picked up the food, and I was like, make it a to-go order now. Because we're not eating.
Let's get out of here. That's funny. Was she nice about it, or was...
Yeah, she was still kind of like weirded out. And I think because right after he said that, he was kind of like I was like, step away from the counter, and he was he goes, what? And I mean,
that's funny. But then not to make fun of the guy, because obviously he's got something wrong with him. But I mean, it's funny.
Well, yeah, and then there's another person in my life who I'm close to who also has Asperger's. You would have to spend days with him before you knew that he might have something, that there might be some kind of, but otherwise you wouldn't know. And if you look at one, he was really, just sort of like, his parents were like, raise yourself. They didn't really put they were in denial that he had anything for the longest time.
Wow, so he wasn't diagnosed.
No, he wasn't. Just for the longest time he was diagnosed. But the father was like, no way, my son has that.
In denial, in some way, saying it was his fault or something.
So they were in denial. They were like, there's nothing wrong with him, when there was. And so they didn't put in the extra effort to raising him that they should have. And so he really raised himself on TV.
Wow.
I mean,
That's
if you've
scary.
ever seen the movie or the show Community, there's a character in there named Ahmed, and he's, his character has Asperger's and raised himself on TV. And so he's always, everything's like a movie to him. And this person in my life is the same way, where, oh, that's just like Fast and Furious, oh, that's just like Triple X, and
those movies are nothing like reality.
Right. They don't reflect reality, but he had to raise himself on those. And he could never really take social cues well, and he was never trained to take social cues well. My other friend, on the other hand,
The well-adjusted
was very
guy.
diligently, when he was younger, you could tell. But he graduated college, and if you met with him now, you'd have no idea that he struggles with that. That there's actually something going on in his mind where he has to be like, I have an urge to say this thing, but I'm not going to.
Wow.
Or I have an urge to like do this, but I'm
but I know
but I'm just not gonna. I'm just not gonna do it. Or enough to cognitively think like, okay, in this situation, I should probably do A and not B. Whereas there's no filter on the other person, and he says, well, I'm just going to do B.
Yeah.
Because that's all.
He doesn't know the self-control.
Well, because I saw it work in, the Arrow. So that's how it is in real life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, you
can't separate actors from reality.
Oh, yeah. Well, and so, it's just one of those things where you see two people with the same disease. Now, maybe one of them is seriously on a whole nother level as far as the spectrum goes. I don't know. Because when I look at the younger versions of them, they're the same. They're very much like, don't really have the self-control, don't really have the filter, don't really have the discipline to think through what they're doing, and they just do it.
Yeah.
But now, right, after years and years and years on one person's part of social, just being brought up right and being trained on how to control his urges and how to, really think through like, okay, this would be appropriate in this situation. And he functions perfectly fine. He has a job where he's making probably double, triple what I do. And he's got Asperger's.
Yeah.
But you would never know because
know.
he controls it. And so that's one thing where it's like can the social, it seems in that situation that the social can override the social conditioning that was given to him by his parents in the form of training and proper raising has been able to override that chemical imbalance where he just can't, and sometimes it takes him a while to process a situation, but he's a smart guy. He's very bright, and like I said, when people find out that he has it, they're like, what?
Whoa, what?
Yeah, I had no idea.
That's interesting.
Because they're used to seeing people like
the other guy,
person A, where
they give it a bad name or whatever. Yeah. There's one interesting thing that I wanted to kind of bring up that was, in regards to, like we were talking about mental health versus a gun problem kind of thing. And I think that a lot of people want to say, well, this person has Asperger's. He can't help it. Or this person has this. They can't do this or whatever. But you see, or for example, you want to flip the script and you could say, well, he's an alcoholic. He can't stop drinking. But many very well adjusted alcoholics. I had a podcast a couple days ago with my friend Davis, who's been 4 years sober now. He's an alcoholic and he's very well adjusted. He's doing very well. And so, but he would still consider himself an alcoholic. And I think sometimes people would say, that's a crutch. Don't call yourself that anymore. That's you're weighing yourself down by still hanging on to that. You're not an alcoholic anymore. You've cured yourself of that. but he still has those urges from time to time. Not as frequently as he had before because he's been sober for many years now, or for a few, I guess 4. It's an amazing accomplishment, but in the grand scheme of life, it's not much time. But as far as someone with Asperger's, you could say, well, he has Asperger's. He can't help it. He has to. But then you could say, well, there's this guy over here that was extremely well adjusted. He had Asperger's, or has it, but you wouldn't even be able to tell. This guy's an alcoholic. He's a drug addict. He can't help it. Well, this guy was a drug addict, and he would consider himself still one, but he's very well adjusted, and he has the self-control to not have those urges. And that's a complicated subject, but I think that, using it as a kind of a legal thing almost in court, well, he's an alcoholic. He couldn't help it. It's not really an excuse. There's always ways to cope. And
if you see the individual as being, and this is again where, a worldview and what you presuppose about the nature of human existence, right? It depends on what you presuppose about it. That's going to determine how you would look at that and how you would answer that question, right? So if you believe that man is just, that we're purely biological, right? And that we're purely creatures of social conditioning, we're purely creatures of biology, then saying, hey, he couldn't control it, makes perfect sense. Just like a dog, right? I mean, you get some dogs where they see a small
dog,
animal, and it just triggers something inside them, something primal, something more base, where they're like, I need to, even though they may have never seen an animal like that before, or never torn
maybe they were
an animal.
A house pet or something, and they finally get outside or whatever.
But they still want to, it triggers something where they're fixated on it. And you have to, I've had dogs, especially some bully breeds, where they were so fixated on that thing, I had to physically get on the ground and wrestle them down, because their mind was just like,
I'm going to kill that thing.
And I think you can see that in human beings sometimes. But if you also believe that the human being is capable of self-control, right? That they're more than just a biological process, right? That maybe the person has a soul, or maybe that consciousness is more than just something relegated to chemical process in the brain, then you can say, hey, that you knew it was wrong and you knew you shouldn't do it, but you did it anyways, and you should have had the self-control to not give into that urge. And right now our legal system assumes the latter. It assumes that you're more than just a biological, well-constructed pile of cells.
Yeah.
It assumes that you're a thinking, rational creature that is not just a slave to your biological processes.
Yeah.
And that you can make an informed decision, that you can make a rational, moral decision to say, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Even though it's enticing.
We've evolved past that reptilian brain. You
Sure.
have another layer, bro. Like everyone knows it. We know we're not chimpanzees,
And
we're
so,
humans.
Yeah, and so we're
unique in that way.
Yeah. Even our legal system assumes that.
Yeah.
And it's constructed around that.
Yeah. Which is a good thing.
And there's a Christian ethic behind that. There's a Judeo-Christian ethic behind that, which says, you could have not stolen, but you chose to steal, right? Where the latter would say, well, you stole because you couldn't have done anything else.
Yeah, it was shiny. You had to get it.
Yeah.
You wanted it. You had to get it.
And so again, that goes back to the response, right? The response of the first, right, where you believe that somebody could have done otherwise, you say, hey, you know what? Because you could have done otherwise and you did not control yourself because you did it anyways, this is going to be the punishment for that. Mm-hmm. Whereas, on the other hand, you have the rehabilitative, and it's often called a humanitarian theory of justice, where it's like, we need to rehabilitate, we need to be nice.
Yeah, because some would argue that jail doesn't do anything positive besides keep bad people away from everyone else. And like the person that comes out of a jail is no better than the person that went in.
Correct. And that's where I think our legal system, there should be more, like, I mean, for violent offenders, it's one thing. But for nonviolent offenders...
Nonviolent drug crimes, having small amounts of marijuana.
Right. Like, dude,
why are we locking these people up in cages?
Well, yeah, and it's like, you know what? Even if you remained it, and even if it was still a crime, like, why are they going to the big house? Why? Somebody steals. And even you see this in the Bible, where the punishment for things like theft was not you're going to be isolated from everybody now. The punishment was, hey, you're going to you're going to give restitution. You're going to make right what you stole. You're going to give it back and then some.
Yeah. Tenfold or whatever.
And so
that's a great way.
That's one thing that I think there should be a lot more of. I mean, what's wrong with community service, Yeah. Hey, you sped.
There's a lot of Asian countries that do that, don't they? Like, I've heard that there's some countries, I think Singapore, like if they catch you putting gum somewhere, you're committed to like hours of community service, and they almost shame you into not littering or putting gum on the subway or whatever it is.
I don't know where I heard this, and it might be wrong. I think gum is not sold in Singapore for reasons like that.
Huh.
I don't know if it's illegal, but I think it's very, like, if you're chewing gum, you better watch out.
It's a dirty habit.
If you spit on the sidewalk, you'll get fined. And if you, if you do graffiti. Now, if you do graffiti in Singapore,
you're fucked.
The punishment is like public flogging. and so these stupid like kids from the West will go. They'll be like, bro, let's
tag up Singapore.
Yeah. No, and they'll be like, let's write our name. They'll write like, they'll like write their freaking name on like a monument or something.
Idiots.
And Singapore catches them, and the embassy's like, no, don't flog them. And Singapore's like, no, this is Singapore. We're going to cane them for what they did. And so they get caned.
That's amazing.
And
dude, screw those kids.
But you know what? I'd rather get caned than go to jail
That's true.
Or pay a fine of like thousands of dollars. I'd be like, dude, cane me.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you hear about those Boy Scouts recently? They were out in some in the desert somewhere, and they knocked over this giant rock that was like balanced perfectly. It was like this monumental rock. You ever seen those pictures of like a rock that's about, you're like, wow, that's beautiful. All the erosion and wind and all this stuff has made this rock sit so perfectly perched, and like three of them pushed a giant rock over and it fell down this giant ravine. And I'm like, wow.
A bunch of idiots.
And they posted the video on YouTube.
Stupid, man.
They got kicked out of the Boy Scouts, and there's some sort of thing that's happening to them. But, I mean, how stupid can you get, man? Like, knocking over a beautiful rock. That's something,
Having been in Boy Scouts, I'm sure they had no idea what they were pushing over.
Yeah.
Maybe they did, but even then... I
think they wanted to make their mark. Like, in the video, they said something about, like... Now we've forever changed the landscape of this place, or something weird like that. And it's like,
well, one, they didn't do what the Boy Scouts say, right? Leave no trace. But having been in Boy Scouts, it's definitely like when I hear a story like that, I'm like, yep.
Sounds like a Boy Scout. Yep.
Yeah. That's what they do.
Yeah. So we've definitely talked a lot about, politics, morality, all kinds of legal stuff. And, we were kind of talking about the biological impacts versus the social impacts and all this stuff. And I think that, someone listening to this might say, well, here's just two stupid, privileged white kids talking about these, very complex issues. And I think that for me, maybe you could say that I was a pretty privileged white kid growing up in the South. And I think that you have a much more interesting, different story, and that it's not that common and people would not expect. And I think that sharing that story would be extremely valuable. And one thing that I've been really thinking about a lot recently, and I've started off a lot of my podcasts actually this way, is kind of thinking, we look at somebody on the street, we look at that guy that came up to you in the car that was cussing you out because you blocked him. And you look at that guy and you think, wow, this guy's a piece of shit, this guy's a thug, this guy's whatever, But you don't tend to think about, okay, like, this is a man who's obviously got some issues, and there's a series of issues that throughout his whole life that have caused this, and at one point he was just an innocent baby that didn't know any better. We don't tend to think of that. We tend to think of someone as like a fixed human being, and obviously that's not the case. So, kind of bring me back to, how did Trey Reed of today, how old are you right now? You're 25, turning 26 on May 25th?
7.
Oh, May 27th. That was close. That's one day after my birthday. That's why I remembered. So you're turning 26 in a couple weeks. So how did infant Trey Reed turn into almost 26-year-old Trey Reed? So where were you born? Or I guess your story kind of starts a couple weeks before you were born, right? Or really, when your parents got married. So your mom and your dad got married. When did they get married?
They got married in December of 1990.
Of 1990.
And the date of my birth will tell you about why the marriage happened.
I see. I see.
But my dad died May 9th, and I was born May 27th.
Wow. So they were married in December.
Yeah, they were married in December.
And only after 5 or 6 months of being married, your dad passed away.
Yeah. Now, they had dated for like somewhere between 8 to 10 years.
Wow. So it wasn't just like that marriage was fresh. It was much longer.
Yeah, 8 years. My mom met my dad when she was 19 or 20.
Wow.
And they dated for a very long time.
And where is your mom from originally?
Ohio.
Your mom's from Ohio, just like my dad.
Yeah.
And then your dad was from where?
My dad was born in the Philippines on an island called Negros Occidental, which is Western Negros Island, so Western Black Island.
Western Black Island.
And
in the Philippines. How many islands are in the Philippines?
Too many to count.
Really?
I don't even think
like literally hundreds.
I mean, it's thousands.
Wow.
Of islands. It's
crazy.
Now there's 3 main like big conglomerates of islands, but the Philippines is just a bunch of islands.
Yeah.
So he was born there. My grandfather was managing the world's biggest sawmill at the time, which was on that island.
Wow.
And they deforested that entire island. Gosh. I went there with a buddy, and my friend was Filipino, and he's talking to me. He was like, actually, it would have been quite beautiful if the forest was still here, but I think your grandfather made sure that was not possible. I'm like, yeah, I guess. I felt bad.
Hey, it's not you, it's your grandfather,
Now all they can do is grow sugarcane there.
Wow.
That's their biggest, on that island now. But they make some
that specific island.
Yeah, but they make some good rum.
So makes sense.
Yeah, it's actually pretty good.
Cool. So to kind of go back, so your father was born on that island in the Philippines.
He was born there,
and then when did he come here?
I don't know how old he was when he came. He was born in the mid 50s, and then I think he was born in. He was born in the mid 50s, and then they came over here when he was around when he was in elementary school. So I think he was about maybe 8 or 9 when they came over here.
So he definitely remembered living there and grew up there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so he came over with his grandfather or with his mom and dad.
Mm-hmm. Grandma, grandpa, and then all the kids. So there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids.
Wow.
He was the oldest. And they came over, and then they lived in Dunwoody. And my grandparents never moved. They died in that house as well.
Wow. So you're half Filipino, half Caucasian?
I'm only a quarter. My grandfather was white.
Oh, really?
And he married my grandmother, who was Filipino.
I see. So your grandfather, the one who owned the sawmill, was white?
He didn't own it, but he managed it.
I see.
Yeah, he was white. And we went and visited. We actually managed to locate the house where they lived. Wow. It's still there.
That's cool.
Yeah. We located the house where they lived, and that was really cool. There's not much left of the sawmill because after they had deforested the whole place,
there wasn't much else for them to do.
They just left. They left everything there. And then the Filipinos went and just like tore the place apart.
Probably sold the equipment.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever, yeah.
The equipment, there was a train track. There was a railroad that went through that basically connected the whole island for the operations of that sawmill. And I was like, where's the train tracks? And one of the locals was like, well, when they left, the Filipinos literally went and ripped the tracks up to sell the metal for scrap.
Makes sense.
And I'm tempted to at sometimes think like, oh man, look at, we exploited that island for its resources, evil white people. But actually, when I was talking to locals there, and even later on Facebook, there's a group of Filipinos who grew up there, who remember
the sawmill,
and they actually have like a fond fascination with it because it was their home. And I was talking to one of the guys, and I was like, "What do you think about it? What do you think about?" Because they deforested most of that island, and it's grown up. There's a lot grown now because it's been 50, 60 years since. But he was saying, he said we loved it, and the reason he did was because when that sawmill came, they employed locals. Most of the people who were operating the sawmill, apart from there were some Westerners there who were obviously like company people, but the Insular Lumber Company, which is what it was called, they hired. Everybody who was on that island, for the most part, most people had a job with that sawmill, and they were paid well for what the average Filipino was making. And he said it's because of that company, because of that lumber mill, that our parents were able to work, make more than decent money for the average Filipino, and that we were able to go off to college to become pharmacists, lawyers, doctors, and engineers. And I said, wow. I'm like, I never even thought about it that way.
That makes a lot of sense.
But a lot of them, I'm sure there's somebody that hates it. But
yeah, I'm sure.
A lot of them that I spoke to were like, yeah, we loved that sawmill, and we wish it was still here because
it gave us an opportunity.
Yeah, it gave people work where there previously was none. Before that, I don't know what people did. Maybe sugarcane. I know sugarcane is big now because there's just large swaths where there was a forest but isn't anymore. And so sugarcane is a huge thing for them, and people are able to make a lot of money off of sugarcane there. But, it was because that company was there that people were able to actually make a better life for themselves. Now, previously, in the Philippines today, living in the provinces outside of the capital, Manila, is like, it's pretty rough.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between life in the country there in the provinces and life in Manila. And
why do you think that is, that the Filipinos have always been such kind of an oppressed people, I guess?
When I asked my aunt that in the Philippines, she was like, what did she say? she was basically like, the Filipinos do it to themselves. But I didn't buy that. She's Filipino, so I'm not,
Yeah.
But she was like, the Filipinos do it to themselves. I'm like, what?
The Filipinos.
Yeah, the Filipinos. But
That's funny.
I don't know, man. It's interesting.
I think that's definitely true with a lot of people. A lot of negative things in people's lives are typically self-caused or self-inflicted. But I think there's something deeper, especially with, the Filipinos or whatever you can want to say about that.
Well, and I don't think that the Filipinos did it to themselves. Obviously, they were conquested by the Spanish for hundreds of years. For a very long time, they were just conquested by the Spanish treated them terribly. When you go to the Philippines, I don't know how true this is, but my buddy told me. So when you go to the Philippines, they'll give you, when you're sitting down to eat, right? They give you a fork and a spoon. There was never a knife. And when you see people, they
cut with the spoon.
They'll cut the meat with the spoon. And I'm like, why do you guys do this?
Yeah.
Obviously, we never had that problem here. Grandma always gave me a knife. But I was like, why do you guys not use knives? And one of the reasons that I was told by friends who lived there was that when the Spanish, culturally, they just don't use knives because the Spanish wouldn't let them have knives.
They wouldn't let the Filipinos have knives.
Correct.
For fear that they would use them to attack them or something.
Right.
Wow.
Which I'm kind of like, I'm like, well, that
kind of makes sense.
That's interesting, but at the same time, it's like they still would have had machetes and stuff to,
yeah,
like actually do farm work and
seems
whatnot.
Silly.
But that's what I was told. So there's a deep legacy of oppression where the Spanish are concerned. Now the Americans, I don't know too much about it. We had the Philippines as a colony for a while, and we gave it up. We lost it as a colony, if my history is correct, when Japan... I don't know if the Filipinos were self-governing at that point. But
we gave them up.
When we pulled out of Japan at the start of World War II, I don't know if at some point we gave them we didn't have the Philippines for very long.
Gotcha.
I think we gained it in the late 19th century after war with Spain. And then that was part of the deal. They gave us the Philippines.
It's interesting.
But there was some good that came from that because the Spanish previously had said, well, the Filipino, you will not be educated. But when the Americans got there, they were like, you had a lot of... Because wherever Americans go to colonize, typically they're followed very closely by missionaries. Missionaries are usually some of the first people to go in. And missionaries got there and they were like, man, these people need education. And so they established similar to American-style education where it was, hey, this is free for everyone. And so if you look at their college system, it's almost identical to ours. But you really have this education system which didn't even come in until the 20th century, where the Americans were like, man, these people need to be educated. Previously, the only education you got was either from the Catholic Church or from, if you had the money to afford it. But when the Americans came in, they said, hey, we want to put... And so there's education if you're in the provinces, there's education. One of my best friends, who's living there now, and I was a groomsman at his wedding, he grew up in the provinces. He worked very hard, very smart guy, and now he has his own business in Manila, and he does well for himself. And I'm always very impressed at how he made it. Another buddy of mine grew up in the provinces, and he worked very hard, and now he's an engineer. And so he also makes, for the Filipino, he makes good money.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly intelligent, was smart enough to go to Korea to receive a master's degree on a full ride scholarship.
Wow.
I mean, he's just incredibly bright,
That's
incredibly
amazing.
gifted.
So if he went to school in Korea, just, was he speaking English at that school, or what were they teaching in? Did he know Korean, or?
Some schools in Korea, especially the STEM subjects, they'll be like, hey, you speak English. Because if you want to go anywhere, right, you need English as a trade language.
Makes sense.
So he was able to do most of his stuff in English. But
that's cool.
Like any good Filipino, I mean, Filipinos are chameleons when it comes to other cultures. They can go to any culture in the world and they can thrive there.
It's very interesting.
They can come here, they thrive here. They go to Korea, they thrive in Korea. They go to Dubai, they thrive in Dubai.
Do you think that's maybe partly due to the fact that they are divided up on these islands?
I don't know, man. It's interesting. So the Filipino, in the Philippines, they all learn English. So when they go to school, a lot of the schooling is done in English. So they speak Tagalog, which is the native tongue. But then in each province, there's different dialects. So a buddy of mine is from Mindanao, and I don't remember what they speak. I called it Mindanese as a joke, but it's not.
It's not Mindanese.
No, but they have a specific language that they speak there that's not Tagalog. So he speaks already 3 languages before he even went to Korea. So he speaks what they speak in Mindanao. He speaks Tagalog, and his English is impeccable.
Wow.
And then then he goes to Korea, learns Korean. So I think with the Filipino, they have a native tongue, and then they have the national language, and then they have exposure to English in schools. So I think when they go to different places, and also in the Philippines, the culture is so mixed. You have a native culture, you have a Spanish culture, you have Chinese influence, and then you have American Western influence. And so I think when they go to a new place, linguistically, because they've already learned, 2-3 languages already, picking up a new one is a breeze. So they're able to pick up a new language very quickly. And then culturally, they're able to adapt because in their own culture, they have such a wonderful blend of
so many
different cultures. I mean, if you go to the Philippines, you'll see, gosh, the women there are freaking gorgeous. The people there are beautiful. You'll see people that will look as white as me or as white as you, and they are totally 100% Filipino. Then you'll see people who have a more darker complexion, who are, more of native descent, and they're Filipino. Just as Filipino as the guy who is, whose skin is very light and white. And then you have people who look like just straight up Chinese, and they're Chinese Filipino. And then you have the Spanish Filipino. Then you have the native Filipino. And so there's a whole gambit of just cultural mixing in there. And I think that's why they are able to thrive wherever they go.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So to kind of backtrack for a second, so your roots are, in the Philippines, and you were growing up with your mom, who
is not Filipino.
Who's not Filipino. Did you still kind of feel that connection to that? Because did you meet your grandparents your grandmother that was Filipino?
Oh yeah, she raised me. It's funny because when I was a kid, it was just that's how life is,
Yeah.
That's how my grandmother talks. I never thought that she spoke weird until I got older, and then all of a sudden everyone brings up these things of race and cultural identity and all that stuff. That was just how things were for me.
Yeah.
So
she has a Filipino accent.
Oh yeah, she would, I'd come in, "Hi grandma." She'd say, "Oh, hi dear." And
that's great.
She spoke English impeccably. She spoke Tagalog, and she was fluent in Spanish.
Wow.
She was a mestiza. So she was mixed, like Spanish and Filipino.
Gotcha.
Native. So she was a mixture. She was a very, very beautiful woman who, she was a flight attendant back in the day when you actually had to be gorgeous to be a flight attendant. And she was a flight attendant for Philippine Airlines, and had so much, even into her old age, had so much poise and class and grace about her. She was a wonderful woman.
That's awesome.
But I grew up, I didn't grow up thinking that was different from anyone else's experience.
He's like, this is my grandma.
Yeah, that's grandma.
It's just how she is.
I didn't ever think like, this is a Filipino thing and this is a white thing. I was like, this is a Reed thing. This is what we do in my family. This is what we eat. So, for me, when we would eat Christmas dinner, we had all the typical American fixings, but we also had Filipino foods there. And for me, it was this blend of Southern cuisine and Filipino cuisine.
That's awesome.
And, like the dessert was never cake. It was flan, or another Filipino dessert called brazo de Mercedes, which is literally the arm of Mercedes. And it was like this egg-based, custard-based goodness.
And brazo is Spanish, right? So is that kind of that mixture that you're talking about? Huh. Yep. Makes sense.
Even flan is a Spanish thing, but if you go to the Philippines, man, flan is that's where it's good.
Nice.
So growing up eating those things and hearing her stories and just doing cultural things, like I remember getting in trouble by her for replying with yeah. She would say, "It's yes, not yeah. Don't say yeah like that to me." And I was like, "Oh."
That accent's amazing.
And so I never grew up. It's the funniest thing, because when you're young, you don't... It's just like, even growing up with, in a church with Sudanese refugees and stuff like that, I was never like, oh, they're different from me. I didn't even care about like the skin color, where they came from, culture. I was like, whatever. It's, it was all equal. And, I never really made anything to distinguish between the white American Southern culture and then the Filipino culture. It was just a blend, and that's how it was.
That makes sense. So, obviously, growing up without a father, I'm sure that had a large impact, on how you saw the world and stuff. And there was like a Facebook post you made a couple of days ago on Mother's Day that was really beautifully written.
Oh yeah.
That was awesome, about just talking about how your mom did an amazing job of raising this rebellious kind of crazy kid that you are.
If it had not been for, there's also choices I made, but if it had not been for the foundation that my mother instilled in me, and really, also my entire family, my mom wasn't alone. My grandmother helped raise me into the man I am. There's a few aunts and uncles in specific who just cared for me like their own children. And so I'd be remiss if I left them out of it. But a lot of what my mom did was to instill a foundation. And I think the only reason that I made those good decisions was because of the foundation that she gave me. And I think, when you look at it statistically, kids that grow up without dads, the jails are full of men who grew up without a father, whether through abandonment or death. And I think there's a difference between, I think it's worse to be abandoned than to have your father snatched away from you through death.
Yeah.
than for him to just say, I want nothing to do with you, so I'm leaving.
That is messed up.
I think there's a difference.
There's a psychological.
Yeah, I think it has a different effect on you. It's because it's not like my dad chose it.
Yeah.
He just, you know.
What was the cause of death?
He died in a car accident.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he...
That's rough.
But you know what? It was, in all honesty, it was his own fault. He was in a... look back on it, he had a week before I looked at his journal. I found his old planner for the year that he died.
I'm sure that was trippy.
And there was a card for somebody from, I believe, State Farm to talk about life insurance a week before he died, and he never went to that appointment.
Wow.
I think he told my mom something like, I'm not going to die. And then a week later, he died. But he was working very hard. He had a very successful business. My grandpa had been in the sawmill industry, and he was considered for the longest time one of the world's foremost experts on sawmilling and saw production and maintenance. And so my dad was in that. So he had a service where he sharpened saws, and he figured out a technology and a way to sharpen saws better and more efficiently, because typically what you've got to do is, you've got those teeth and you've got to get in there and sharpen each one individually. He found out a way to sharpen the saws in a very efficient, fast, and good way to get all the teeth, but quick. And so he actually would go to these huge lumber mills, even all around Georgia, and he would sharpen for them.
Huh.
He would sharpen these giant band saws that they were using to split logs. He would, sharpen these giant rotary saws that they were using to actually cut down the trees. But he was doing really well. He actually was supposed to have a deal. He was in the process of having a deal with Georgia Pacific.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah, but obviously when he died, that fell through.
And what happened to his business?
Well, so he had a trailer attached to his truck, and the trailer didn't have brakes. And he came to an intersection, and when he stopped, because the trailer didn't have brakes, he didn't stop slow enough. And that trailer had that momentum, and it literally, my uncle said he and some others went and looked at the site where the crash had happened, and you see these tire marks where literally the trailer went and just bounced out. If you can imagine this trailer being attached and going, the wheels coming out onto the side, and the trailer went boom, 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 and it bounced him out into the intersection, and he was hit by an 18-wheel truck.
Wow.
And
was the 18-wheeler... Did the 18-wheeler driver die as well?
No, he was fine. Nothing happened to him. He's in a huge truck.
Yeah,
my dad's in a
truck.
small little compact truck hauling all the stuff around. Well, they came back, and a couple weeks, actually maybe a month after I was born, they sent a letter of notice to my mom that they were suing. So they sued my mom.
Who was suing? The 18-wheeler company?
Yeah, that company.
Wow.
They sued my mom.
And that was after she had you?
After she had me.
Wow.
And
what a rough month.
After he died, it was the company was liquidated.
Makes
probably
sense.
To pay for that.
Makes sense.
To pay for that lawsuit.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we had nothing.
Wow.
We had nothing. His business was gone. There was no money from that because of the lawsuit.
And obviously you don't remember any of this because you were an infant.
Yeah. And my mom was... So we had to move out of where we were, and she moved in with... she moved around. We lived with my aunt for a while, and then there was a great aunt who we lived with for some time. But and I don't think it was till I was like maybe 2 or 3 that we actually had our own house. So for the first couple years of my life, we just bounced around.
Is that the house that she has now?
That's the house I live in now.
Wow.
So,
that's an amazing story, man. And it's unfortunate, obviously, that, that happened, but of course it's,
it's
your story.
He died the 9th, and it's always hard for my mom. It's not as hard for me because I never knew him.
Yeah.
I mean, I missed him in the sense that he wasn't around. But this is not really, I can't miss him because I didn't know him. But I always wonder, how different life would have been.
Of course.
But, this is the lot that God gave me and my mom. And I don't think I would, it'd be nice if Dad was around. But at the same time, this is the lot that God gave me, and I can't complain.
Yeah.
I'm blessed in ways that others aren't.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I could have done, like I said, I could have ended up in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I could have ended up.
You just got in with the wrong crowd growing up, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
in high school.
Yeah, it's and there were plenty of opportunities for that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of like what, we were talking about earlier, the whole self-control thing, just kind of knowing what to do in situations, and this is what I want to do, and this is what I probably should do and could do. And
right, and I got in trouble all the time as a kid. I was never out of trouble. I mean, there was just so many instances where I think, like, how did my mom not just strangle me? Because I was pretty bad. I think it was just after when I turned 17, I became a Christian, and that's when things really started to change.
So to kind of clue people in, so we met when we went to the same school. We went to a private Christian school at our church, and I think when I started going there, I was homeschooled until I was in 4th grade, and then when I was in 4th grade, there was a kind of group of people in the neighborhood that all went to this one school. So we had like a carpool, and Trey was in my carpool. So Trey was so you're about to turn 26, so you were like 3 grades ahead of me, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I'm about to turn 23. So, and were you always younger than everyone in your class, or were you older than everyone in your class, typically?
I was typically younger.
Okay, yeah, me too. So I was wondering about the whole holding back thing, some people, if they're born in the summer.
What year did you graduate high school?
2012.
Yeah, 3 years.
3 years.
3 years difference.
So when I was in 4th grade, Trey was in 7th grade, I guess. And, yeah, that makes sense, right? And so Trey was, the difference between a 4th grader and a 7th grader is pretty drastic. 3 years now, it doesn't seem like we're that far apart. We can have a normal conversation. But a 4th grader and a 7th grader have a much different conversation. They have much different experiences.
We just had a Mad Libs in the back of the car, and we just wrote poop for every adjective. And now...
And the first thing I remember of Trey was just that he was hilarious. Like, I just thought Trey was, like, the funniest person. He could always make us laugh. He was always saying ridiculous things. And actually, you were like my babysitter a couple times. I remember like my parents would go, out to dinner or whatever. And Trey was our babysitter. Me and my brother always wanted Trey to be our babysitter when my parents went out or whatever.
And I think your parents got to the point where they figured out what was good for you guys and stopped asking me to come over.
Well, I think it was mainly, too, just because I was already kind of in 4th grade and I got a little bit older. We just didn't really need a babysitter that much after that anyways. But I always remembered that. We always had fun. But, yeah, that was what I definitely remembered about you, is that you were hilarious. And I definitely do remember, just telling ridiculous stories about stuff that happened in school that day or whatever on the way home from carpool. Like, this girl said this and this happened, or she's fat anyways, or something. And I would just, like, crack up laughing or whatever. And it was, sometimes it was humor at the expense of other people, but it was always
most of the time
pretty hilarious.
Well, and then we had one guy, I won't name him, but
yeah,
he rode with us, and he was, dude, me and him were, I mean, we were a trip, dude. It was, we
had some good carpool times back in the day.
Last I heard of him, he's a meth dealer now, but.
Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. And I was also going to say, with Sam Ely.
Oh, dude, and Sam would laugh at anything.
Sam would laugh at anything, man. He was, I remember one time in particular, we were on the way to Boy Scouts, because me and Trey were also in Boy Scouts together, so we also had a Boy Scout carpool going. Mm-hmm. And that's what it was, because Sam didn't go to Perimeter, but he went to Boy Scouts with us. And I remember one time in particular, you were making Sam laugh so hard that he almost like peed himself. And like his mom was like, stop making him laugh. He's going to like pee himself or something.
I remember his mom was like slammed her hands on the steering wheel. She was like, stop it.
Yeah.
Enough.
Yeah, I remember that.
And Sam's still in the back laughing. He's like choking on his own breath. He's dying.
I don't even remember. I remember you were like, or something like that.
There was literally a noise.
Just a sound. I remember, I think I might have instigated it. I was like, I think you can make Sam laugh with only saying one sound.
Now, what it was, I mean, we were kids, and I look back on it now, I'm like, why was that funny? But we would just, we'd look at him, we'd go, duh! And he would just lose it.
You thought it was the funniest thing.
He would lose it, man.
And, you know, obviously, Sam's not here anymore. Sam passed away, and I think his mom said it most beautifully, that Sam lived in extremes.
Yeah.
That he lived, you know, he was either extremely happy or he was extremely, you know, down in the dumps. He was extremely depressed or whatever. And that was kind of beautiful. And I hadn't ever really thought of people that way before, you know, living life in those extremes. And I think that was one silly but, you know, hilarious example that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sam was so crazy, and you could get him to just laugh at just about anything, and that was awesome, you know. And I miss Sam, you know. He was really cool in that way.
Yeah, me too. I saw his dad the other day. He came to my range, actually. We talked for a while. Yeah, Sam is definitely still missed, but
definitely. But you know, not to be morbid or anything, but obviously, you know, we were talking about, you know, we'll move on. Boy Scouts and everything, that's where me and Trey kind of got to know each other, I would say, better in the Boy Scouts and stuff. And you know, before we started recording, I think we were talking about Boy Scouts, and you know, you kind of said that you weren't able to get your Eagle Scout, you know, because of some annoying leaders that were probably being a little too strict on you, and maybe even trying to, you know, you can't, basically for anyone listening, you can't become an Eagle Scout after your 18th birthday.
Yeah.
And so Trey's 18th birthday was approaching, and I think probably this Scoutmaster was fed up with the deadlines of all these kids waiting till the last minute of turning 18, you know, like, these kids need to learn a lesson. These kids waited too long. They should have done this 2 years ago, and now they're forcing me to feed through their project last minute, and I will not stand for it. I'm not going to... You know what? I'm going to make it really difficult for this kid, and if he doesn't get his Eagle, he doesn't get his Eagle, and he'll learn his lesson that way.
Well, what's stupid is that I came from a different count. So in Boy Scouts, you have to submit an Eagle Scout project. You have to have a write-up, and the write-up has to be pretty detailed. I came from an area where... So I had moved Boy Scout troops, and I came from an area where I was down in Decatur, where it was much more simple. They were more worried about what you're actually doing as a project than how well did you write this up. And the people who were doing it were just, you know, normal everyday people who were, you know, in that council, that specific council, who were, or the district. You have a council which is larger, which is like Atlanta Area Council. Then you have a district. And so within my district, I was Hightower Trail. And I guess you had people who were just more the everyday man.
Kind of laid back and
reading these projects. And then they're more looking for, because I knew some idiots who are, now like drug addicts who have their Eagle Scout.
Yeah.
And
it's definitely not a testament to your entire life.
No, and they were able to do it, and it's kind of, and then you go to an area like Johns Creek, and the people there are all like CEOs and vice presidents and CFOs.
I never thought about it that way, but that makes sense.
So there's a different standard.
So the scout leaders themselves are more, I guess, socially esteemed, and they are more,
There was definitely a higher standard. It was, these guys were looking for a write-up that was worthy of being a business proposal is what they wanted. And I just got to the point where I'd had to start from scratch, having moved troops. And so I had to find an Eagle Scout project, and I found one that I wanted to do. But before you can proceed, you have to have this write-up approved. And I would submit the write-up, and the guy would send back notes like, well, you say dig a hole. How do you dig a hole? It's like, come on, dude. It's a hole. You dig a hole. And then he'd say, well, you need to give instructions from the, how to get there from the airport. And then he'd say stupid stuff like, all right, so I'm like, all right, whatever. So I give directions from the airport. And then I'd say, then we're
Why did you have to give directions from the airport? In case someone was flying in to...
Yes. In case somebody was flying. He was basically like, somebody should be able to get off a plane, be handed that, and get a... So I had to...
What? So, I don't think I had to put that in mine.
Yeah, see, ridiculous, right? And I had to put in, like, how to get a taxi. Because one of the things he put, he was like, well, how are they going to get to the site from there? What? And I'm like, okay, well, then you need to get on the MARTA, you need to take it up to Doraville Station, and then I had to do all this stuff.
How much does it cost?
Even this is how ridiculous. No.
I know. Like literally, they could pick apart anything. It's kind of like that exercise where you tell people how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you say you get a piece of bread and you stick peanut butter and jelly on it and you eat it. Well, they're like, well, you didn't tell me to take the bread out of the packaging tray.
No, that's exactly
you didn't tell me to get a butter knife and open the packaging of the peanut butter tray. So basically, they want you. The idea is they want someone. This guy wanted someone to be able to get off of a plane, get to your work site, and execute the project exactly how you envisioned it based on this one solitary paper.
Oh yeah, I'm like, and it ended up being like around 60 plus pages. And it got ridiculous because I remember the thing that like set me off, where I was spending at least 4 hours a day after school on this project, and I was not doing my homework or studying for my exams. And I had one class that counted for 3 classes. And I was close to failing that because it was a music class and I had to write a final composition. And I hadn't even started on it because I was spending all my time on this Eagle Scout thing. And it was the first week of May. And I hadn't even gotten my write-up through. And I said, and what happened was I had submitted this thing 4 times. And each time he came back with different criticisms. And I even still have the page on my computer where he wrote 12 pages of criticisms, of revisions.
Wow.
And there was one part where it was like, the shovel thing was a whole nother thing, but there's one part where I said, for lunch, we're going to have hot dogs, grilled hot dogs, and chips, and drinks like that, and it's going to be donated by X person. And his criticism was, what kind of hot dogs, what kind of chips, what kind of Coke, how much do they cost? And I'm like, dude, like, he didn't even put that in the first revision.
He's just nitpicking at this point. He's just
nitpicking.
Just and trying to not get your ego through.
I went to my Scoutmasters. I went to my Scoutmasters and I said, I don't think this is going to happen. And they were baffled at the time that this was happening.
They didn't know that there was this much craziness.
They couldn't. It had never happened to anyone before. They couldn't believe that. When I gotten this one guy who was going to be approving and doing revisions to my project, they said he's kind of tough, but it's okay. We're here and we'll help you out. And I remember before I had submitted it, I submitted it to the guy who was assisting me, who was who was a smart guy, and then I showed it to the scout leaders and said, tell me what you think. The scoutmaster and the assistant scoutmaster both said, this looks good. And then I submitted it, and the fourth time he kicked it back with another 7 pages of revisions.
Wow.
And I looked at them and I said, look, I'm on the cusp of failing a class that will make me a super senior. I haven't even begun to go out and find donations for this project, because you can't do that until it gets approved.
Yeah, you can't start collecting money until it's ready to go.
And I said,
it's not happening.
I said, I don't think this is going to happen. And what's funny is I had started a year before. This whole process went on over the course of a year, figuring out what my project wanted to be. Basically going to the organization and saying, I would like to do this, making plans for it. And then the whole write-up process, because you would submit it to them and he would take a month to get back. And so, think of that, 4 months of just, the initial write-up, maybe I'm spending a few weeks on it, and then sending it back and forth 4 months. After I got that final revision where he was just from left field, a bunch of different stuff that he hadn't
the hot dog thing and all this stuff that he hadn't even mentioned before.
Oh yeah, it's not even stuff that, because I had addressed everything in his initial, and every time I would say, I would get new things. Oh, you say dig a hole?
What kind of shovel?
With what kind of shovel? How do you dig a hole? And I'm saying, we're gonna fill this with gravel. What kind of gravel? How many kinds of gravel are there? It's an Eagle Scout project. I'm gonna take whatever I'm getting donated.
Whatever you can get a hold of. Any kind will work. Whatever kind I happen to get is the kind I'll use.
Oh, for the foundations of these posts, are you using Quikrete? Or are you using something else? You need to specify. It's dude, I don't know yet because it's going to be donated. I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Home Depot and beg until they give me stuff. And I'm going to take whatever I can get. Oh, what kind of lumber is it? Screws. What kind of screws? Who makes them? How much are they? What's the UPC code on that? I'm like, dude. And this guy just railroaded me, and I was like, all right, I'm done. So I
that sucks.
Do that. Yeah.
So you ended up not getting the Eagle Scout thing, which sucks. But to be honest, the Boy Scouts is kind of taking a weird route these days, and I don't know.
Well, now they accept girls.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And I'm not talking transgender. I'm just talking
actual girls.
An actual girl who identifies as a girl.
They have to say identify as a boy.
No, So first they said, the first change came, they said, we will allow openly homosexual scouts, which there was already gays in scouts anyways.
Totally. Always has been. It's just kind of like the Army, don't ask, don't tell kind of deal.
Yeah, I mean,
there's lots of gay stuff that happens in Boy Scouts.
You knew who was gay. And
you get dudes sleeping in tents together over a weekend, you're going to find out real quick who's gay and who's not.
Oh yeah, dude. I can't even get into some of the kind of nasty crap that I was like, who do you tell about this?
Yeah.
And so then they said, okay, now we're also going to allow openly gay adult leadership. Then after that, they said we're going to allow scouts who are transgender girls transitioning to boys. And now they've just said, if you're a girl identifying as a girl, we'll let you into Boy Scouts.
Because what they probably had was a bunch of younger sisters saying, well, now girls are allowed. Well, you got to identify as a boy. Okay, honey, just tell them you're a boy and it'll all be fine.
You know what's so...
And so it just probably got out of hand that all these girls were just saying, yeah, I'm a boy. I want to be a boy. And it's like, that's not what they really felt, but they really just wanted to be in Boy Scouts.
Who knows, dude? But the Boy Scouts capitulated to this, this social, sexual revolution that's taking place in the society, and they capitulated to that. And
it's kind of a shame.
So now the Mormons are leaving, and the Mormons have been like more than half.
And the thing about the Mormons is that's their boys' thing. That's like their hobby. That's their activity. Mormons have always been in Boy Scouts.
Yeah, and I remember because there was always
tons of Mormons.
We would always screw with the Mormon troops at Boy Scout camp. Oh my gosh, dude! We would always do pranks on them because they were the ones that would walk by and be like, "I think you need to tuck in your shirt," and it'd be like,
"Oh God!"
It'd be like, "Dude, why don't you shut up, Mormon?"
Bitch.
Yeah, bitch. He called me a bitch. No, but we would like steal Foot Lockers out of there and throw them in the woods somewhere.
That's hilarious. So to kind of fast forward a little bit, because I wanted to talk about this. You ended up, going through high school, going through summer college, and you ended up going to Korea for a time and learning Korean. How did that all happen?
That is a very, very, very long story.
Yeah. Definitely.
So I don't know if you want to wait to do that.
I was going to say, we probably don't have time to go over all of it, but just to whet people's, interest or whatever, because I definitely want to do this again, because this has been a great podcast so far.
Basically, I went to Korea, so I had served in a small Korean church here.
Is that where you learned Korean?
No, I learned Korean over there. I went to school. Basically, there was a church over there who was like, we want you to, if you come over here, we'll help you with school if you help us with some stuff at church. I was like, that's a pretty sweet deal. So I went over there on faith that they were going to fulfill their promises.
And it's a church, so you're assuming that they would.
And to my great surprise, they walked back on every promise that they had made to me and my pastor here. And not only that, they really, they definitely took advantage of me. I hesitate to say abused, because I was never physically harmed or anything.
Yeah.
But really, I was really sorely neglected as a foreigner. I know what it's like to be a foreigner and have nobody. But they stole from me. They lied to me. They cheated me. And it was the worst year of my life.
Wow.
I lived in a roach-infested house. It's a very long story. It's an interesting one, but it's very long. But at the end, I would say that God really redeemed the time that I had there. And I was there for 2 years. First year was the worst year of my life. Second year was probably the best year I've had so far. So,
wow. That's crazy.
There's a lot of craziness that went on there.
Yeah. And I've heard some of the stories. Obviously, you were there for 2 years. There's probably 2 years worth of stories you could tell.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But, obviously, I think that all those stories are probably stories for another podcast, most likely. We've gone for more than 2 hours, which is pretty solid. It starts over at the 2 hour mark, so we're at 2 hours and 7 minutes. But yeah, man. Do you want to wrap this up, or do you want to keep going on that for a little bit? I've got a little bit of time, or whatever.
No, let's wrap it up. I don't know what else to say from here.
Yeah,
but
I was gonna say, because this Korea story,
because
this Korea story is definitely long. So let's save the Korea stories for next time.
The Korea story is insane.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I think that's for the next podcast. But dude, I really appreciate you being honest and cool and vulnerable and sharing your story, man. Because this is a cool platform. This is like kind of one of the reasons why I want to do it too, because typically it's not very common that I would call you up and be like, yo man, let's talk about when your dad died or something. Like that's kind of a weird thing to just bring up or whatever. But I think this is a cool platform where we can just talk about whatever, man. And I really enjoyed the beginning of our conversation too, where we were kind of talking about politics and all that kind of stuff, because that interests me as well.
You can always make a friend if you let people know that you can always have a good conversation if you let people know that you hate Donald Trump.
I think that's a sentiment that a lot of people can share for sure.
What's funny is even now, like, people who voted for him are like shaking their heads, man.
That was my main, that was one of the main reasons why I voted for Gary too, was because, like, I knew that if I made that type of decision where, I really did not want to vote for Hillary, I think a lot of people were in the same boat, really hated Hillary, so they went with Trump. And I was in the boat where I didn't like both of them, and I said, well, some people would say you can't take yourself out of the situation. You got to choose one or the other because one of them is going to win, which is true. But I think that furthering that third party validity by voting third party is the only way we're ever going to change our system. It's the only way.
That's, I hope Trump gets impeached. He's been nothing but an idiot, and but that's the state of American politics.
Yeah. So I would agree. Well, dude, thanks so much, man. And we'll have Trey back on to tell his crazy Korean stories. For the closeout, give me say some eloquent thank you and goodbye in Korean.
There's no eloquent goodbye.
We'll say thank you for listening to the pod. I mean, I don't even know what you're gonna say. Just say something cool in Korean.
오늘 이 팟캐스트를 잘 들어서 감사합니다. 네, 여러분 안녕. That's
there we
it.
go.
Man, that's it.
I love it. Well, thanks, Trey. All right. See you later, peeps. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you got some value from that conversation, and I hope you were able to see a different side of things, or maybe a different perspective on things. Definitely the beginning of the podcast, we were talking a lot of politics, so maybe we gave some different perspectives there. And then towards the end, really getting to hear Trey's story. It's really very, very powerful. It's very inspiring, and I'm glad that he was able to share that. I can't wait to have him back on so we can discuss his travels in Korea. If you want to support the podcast, the best way to do that is to go to iTunes. I know, iTunes kind of sucks. But if you have an iPhone, just open up the podcast app. I think it comes pre-installed on your phone. If it's not, you can go into the App Store and find it. It's just called Podcasts. It's made by Apple. Go in there and leave it a 5-star review and give me some feedback in there, because I would love to know what you like, what you don't like, how I can make this podcast better. Also, by downloading all of the episodes and subscribing, that helps tremendously. Like I said, iTunes is the best place for the podcast to be discovered, so having lots of downloads is crucial. So even if you won't listen to all the episodes, I would greatly appreciate you downloading all the episodes anyways. And if you want to follow me on my social media platforms, the best way to find me is to go to my website, andrewdeitsch.com. That's Andrew, DEITSCH.com. And you can find links to all of my social media handles and accounts. That's all I got. Episode 6 is up next with my friend Parker Stiles. Parker is the owner of Barrington Acquisitions, a company that he runs with his wife, where they purchase, renovate, and sell or rent out single-family houses. And he actually shared his story of how he went from being an unemployed college grad to running an extremely successful business with multiple employees that pays him while he's asleep. What? So that podcast is coming up next. It's actually extremely informative, and he gives a lot of practical info on how he started that company and what it takes to run a successful business. But thanks again for listening. If you're listening to my voice right now, I appreciate you, and I'm very glad that you're listening, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.